Hey, so this is the Eyeshadow Palette Tag created by Samantha March and Allie Glines. I suppose this is technically round 2 because they have already gone through a round of this in the past year. But since I recently posted my entire eyeshadow collection and inventory, I thought it would be a good opportunity to tell you a little bit more about how I feel about each of these palettes. As you probably already know if you watched the inventory video, I don't actually have a lot of palettes. I have quite a few single eyeshadows and highlighters that I use to supplement my eyeshadow collection. Thus, you're going to see a couple of repeats, which I think is a really good sign in a collection like mine. It means that I have curated it to the point where I really enjoy these palettes for a few different purposes. So let's begin. I am actually going to combine the next two questions together because the same palette is the answer for both. The next two questions are, what is a favorite but one that you can't get rid of, and your favorite collab? And as you probably expect, it is my Morphe and Coca-Cola Cherry Coke palette. So I have already mentioned how I really regret getting this palette, and it is soiling my feelings for the palette as a whole. I actually think that I like a lot of these colors. I really think that these burgundy purples and these soft pinky browns are really flattering on my skin tone and my eye shade. This even has that pink gold duochrome that I can't stop talking about and seems to appear in all of the palettes that I am into. And yet, I can't love it because I have bad feelings associated with both the brand as well as the headspace that I was in when I made this purchase. I don't have a lot of impulse purchases that are truly bad. Usually I have a wish list, and when I do finally make what I consider an impulse purchase, it's usually been planned for, and it's just perhaps not the ideal time, or it happens late at night. But this was truly an impulse purchase. I saw the Cherry Coke, which is one of my favorite treat beverages, and I saw these colors that I already have in other palettes and I love in my other palettes, and I decided that I had to get it. This isn't the most expensive palette in my collection by any means. In fact, I think it's cheaper than my M Cosmetic palettes and about the same price as my Mini Glam. And this one obviously has quite a few more colors than the Mini Glam has. But still, I have bad feelings associated with it, and so whenever I use it, I don't really love the eye colors that I end up creating. And I think that speaks to how your emotional position really does impact how you're able to experience the products that you own. And yet, I can't seem to get rid of it. I still really love these colors, and since I already spent the money on it, and I didn't have a chance to return it before the timing ran out, I think it is probably in my best interest to use up this palette, to see what I can do with it, and to try to give it a little bit of the love that it deserves. Would I say that it's my favorite collab? Probably not. I really love Cherry Coke, as I already have mentioned, but I just don't buy a lot of collab palettes. I guess you could technically say that my Etude Dusty Cat palette is a collab palette because I believe they collabed with a Korean YouTuber, but I didn't know that when I bought it, whereas I think this one makes it very clear that it is a collaboration. Alright, the next question is 2021 favorite, and we are back at where we began, which is my Magic Hour palette. For all of my dislike of the Morphe Cherry Coke palette, I think that it really helped solidify how much I love this tiny little palette. It only has 6 shadows. It is quite a bit more expensive than the Morphe palette because of duties and import fees, but I love it. And unlike the Morphe Cherry Coke palette, this is sparks so much joy. I am a bit of a creature of habit. I would not be surprised if this particular palette pops up again later on as my favorite, simply because I enjoy it so much. But I think that's a good thing. I think I want every single piece of my makeup in my collection to feel like this palette, where every single year I think, yes, that is my favorite palette, and it will remain my favorite palette. And I challenge the industry to give me something that makes me love something even more. The next question is a palette that you didn't expect to love, and for me it has to be the Faded Clementine palette. If you were to compare the Faded Clementine palette with the Magic Hour palette, you could pretty clearly see the artistic vision behind the two at the M Cosmetics headquarters, which is that one is much more subtle and pale and pinky, and one is more intense and rich and purpley. They are two sides of the same coin. They are built for very different audiences, and they are meant to kind of enrich the spectrum. I find it commendable whenever a makeup product tries to be useful for everyone, so they have a really broad range from the very, very light to the very, very dark. But I also think there is a lot of beauty in creating little capsules for everyone. Instead of trying to apply to everyone with one thing, you try to accommodate everyone by giving them their own thought and their own little piece. And that way they are able to engage with the parts that speak the most to them. And that was very much how I felt about the Faded Clementine palette. I think I saw the reviews and the thoughts of a lot of different YouTubers, and for me this was very much built for someone of a slightly deeper skin tone who is able to really use these beautiful rich colors to their advantage and is really going to make those colors pop. I think they deserve something the same way that I think a lot of people really feel comfortable with the Magic Hour palette. But then I fell into a collector's mentality, and I knew I had to have it because, like you have seen inside of the Morphe Cherry Coke palette, I love these rich burgundy purples. And when I got it, I thought it was going to be like my little mini retro palette. It was going to be an accentual palette, where I used it in conjunction with my Magic Hour palette. But surprisingly, these colors sheer out and blend out beautifully. These are what I would truly call watercolor pigments, in the sense that there is a transparency and a translucency to them that is able to accentuate the skin color underneath instead of being pale and chalky and really lying on top of the skin. I also didn't expect to love these bronzes and golds the ways that I do. As I mentioned before, I really love a soft pinky taupey shade selection, but these golds have really gotten me convinced that I could pull off these rich colors. I think partially because of the intelligence built inside of it. There's just enough reddish warmth inside of these colors to really play nicely with my undertones. And so let's talk about the next palette, which is a palette that sparks joy, and it is the Lunar Lavender palette from Kaleidos. Much like its sibling Sashimi City, I think the Kaleidos formula for these shimmers in Lunar Lavender is absolutely gorgeous and creates the most beautiful, ethereal, glittery colors on top of your skin. I think it sparkles beautifully, and you can build it up, especially with a little bit of a fixing medium, into a beautiful metallic sheen. But for eyes like mine, you can sheer it out until it's just a light layer of sparkle. that creates just so much life and light on your eyelids. I think these two purples are pretty much the perfect shades of lavender for people to use. As mentioned in other videos, I think there is a really big struggle with purple, not just in the sense that they are hard to formulate, but also in the sense that you have to find the exact undertones and shades that you are able to get the effect that you want without your skin color, those natural brownish, beigey pigments inside of your skin canceling out the purple. And I think Kaleidos managed to succeed with the Lunar Lavender palette. Sometimes I get tempted by the ColourPop It's My Pleasure or Lilac You a Lot palette, but then I pull out the Lunar Lavender palette and I think, how can there ever be a palette that is more perfect than this? Not only do we have these 4 purples in the center, we also have these 2 browns on the side that are kind of the ideal colors for my skin tone. This slightly lighter brown is a perfect taupey mauvey brown. Unlike the pinkish taupes that I like to use for my wash of color usually, this one has just enough gray and depth to it to really make it unique inside of my collection. It works beautifully as a crease color or transition shade for a lot of people for very good reason. And in the swatch, as you can see, it has a lot of those watercolor translucent qualities that make it so you can build it up and really enrich what it is that you want from the pigment and from the eyeshadow. And as much as I love the other 2 browns in Sashimi City, this one is definitely my favorite dark brown, where there's just enough richness for me to be able to smoke out a lash line or blend out a liner. It is cool enough for me to use in my brows and on most of my eyeshadow looks. I also think that it blends beautifully with these 2 other purples. There's just enough red and blue, enough cool pigment inside of this particular brown to blend beautifully with the purples without making it get muddy, which is often my problem because a brown would have just a little bit too much warmth, a little bit too much yellow, a little bit too much orange for me to really be able to blend and deepen the purples inside of my palette. Whereas this one, when you mix them together, turns into smoky, dark purple that creates an amazing effect on your eyes that really makes, I think, every eye color pop. There's just enough red inside the purple to make blue and green eyes pop. There's just enough coolness in the blue and the deep ashy gray inside of the brown to make brown eyes pop, and definitely help to accentuate eye colors that are hazel and golden in their undertones because of the contrast. I just think this is a really intelligently designed palette, and it helps that it is my absolute favorite colors inside of a single piece that I can pick out and look at and use in order to really get to enjoy all of the dimensions that it offers. And finally, we have the newest palette. Oh, this is not the final. This is the penultimate question. What is the newest collection in my collection? And it is the Etude Dusty Cat, which I bought at the end of 2021. I absolutely love this palette, and I think it is a great accentual piece for something like the Lunar Lavender, as well as many of my other cool leaning pinky mauvey shadows. I have already mentioned how I got this because I really wanted the Natasha Denona Glam palette. But now having this in my hand, I actually think it's better for me than the Glam palette. I really love a wash of color, of just a simple matte pinky mauvey shade on my eyes to help define the space on top of my lash line, because I will often just throw on one of these shades, which are incredibly silky and buttery and smooth, and then define it with eyeliner. I think the powder also helps the eyeliner to last a little bit longer because it is a powder that is sucking in the liquid liner and setting it almost immediately. I think for a lot of people these swatches would be really underwhelming, but it is really attractive to me because of it. It blends into the skin and becomes a perfect way of just adding a little bit of color, a little bit more pink, a little bit more life into my eye looks. In a lot of ways, you can argue that this Dusty Cat palette could also fit into the last category, that it sparks a lot of joy. The last question inside of this tag is the very first palette used in 2022, and for me that is my Venetian Rose palette, which I actually used in conjunction with the Dusty Cat palette. I used a lot of these as transition / blending shades in order to play with the richer, pinkier, mauvey tones inside of Venetian Rose. I had mentioned that the Venetian Rose palette is actually my least favorite of the 3 Divine Skies shadow palettes from M Cosmetics that I own, but I still really love a lot of these colors, and when blended out they create a lot of really feminine, pretty looks, I guess is the best way to describe it. That's whereas Magic Hour is very kind of natural and subtle on top of my skin tone, these really pull out those same cooler undertones that I have already mentioned and play up the pinky mauvey taupes of so many of the palettes that I enjoy. I also really like using these metallics in very different ways than I use the Magic Hour shimmers. Whereas the Magic Hour ones are warm enough to really look natural, these are distinctly pink. And so I love to use this one as an inner corner highlight when I want something that could be seen as specifically makeup. And I love to use this one on my lower lash line to create a little bit of pink dimension when I don't want to use something that is beigey or gold in order to accentuate the look. And this one, unlike the rose gold in the Magic Hour palette that is quite warm, this one is almost reddish in how it is presenting itself. And I think I am going to keep on playing with it because I would love to use it for a Lunar New Year look a little bit more, where there's just enough red to really make it a brilliant shade as a tool. I continue to play with this palette because even though it's my least favorite of the 3 Divine Skies palettes that I have, I still love it. And while it doesn't spark as much joy as Lunar Lavender or Dusty Cat, every time I see it, I think of the really good memories that I have attached to it, including the times that I get to talk about beautiful things with my friends. I look forward to seeing how my relationship with this palette changes. I think a lot of the hesitancy that comes from not wanting to use the Morphe palette is because I have so many of the shades elsewhere in my singles, but also specifically inside of this palette. But I think I should try to change that framework. I should instead think about how they could all supplement each other, build each other up, scaffold together, and create really lovely eye looks that I will keep on wanting to recreate. Alright, so those are all of my answers for the eyeshadow palette tag. And I hope that this was entertaining for you. I would love to tag everyone who watched this, either in your own videos or perhaps in the comments down below. I hope to see you around again soon. Bye!